Welcome to Evolution 6, where success and vulnerability team members share their self of the therapist experience with the content we present. This is important because at all levels of our learning journey in emotionally focused therapy, we all get stuck. We all encounter blocks and we all miss attuned. This isn't something that just happens for beginning EFT therapists. Those of us at all different levels of our learning journey are experiencing these too. And we found that it's extremely important to open up dialogue around what we do when this happens and to validate and normalize the fact that this is happening and that you're not alone. When we can come together and not be afraid to talk about this and feel shame that maybe I'm not a good enough therapist and that's why this is happening, then we're going to be better able to get the resources that we need to help us regroup and get back on track when this does happen. We hope you enjoy Evolution 6. Do you ever get frustrated when your intervention doesn't land? How do you regroup and get back on the right page when this happens? And I want you to be aware that whether you're a beginning EFT therapist, a seasoned EFT therapist, or somewhere in between, this happens to all of us. One of the primary strategies that I learned was to really hold the process front and center, even as I would do interventions. So I learned to ask myself a process question as I would be using an intervention, which would be right here, right now, as I'm using this intervention, is it landing on my client? Is it going the way I was hoping it would go, or am I encountering blocks? When this would happen, I found it was so much easier to figure out what to do next rather than get hijacked into shame. I'm not a good enough therapist. If I was Sue Johnson or I was such and such trainer, then they wouldn't be getting stuck here. And I'm such a terrible therapist. And that's why I'm getting stuck, which of course, which would pull me out of the present process. And I would get hijacked in my head and away from where the client needed me to be. And it would just kind of derail everything. So when I learned to just stick to the process, it helped me be able to stay in the model and figure out where does the model say I need to go from here. So first and foremost, number one is I would just ask myself that process question each step of the way is this landing or is something else happening? Is the client going away or are they going with? If it wasn't landing, and that could be because I was misattuning or there would be a block with the client for whatever reason, if it wasn't landing, what I would do to help myself regroup and not get lost is just to reflect what was happening in the moment. I wouldn't go to, earlier in the session, I wouldn't dig in. Well, when I was a beginning EFT therapist, I used to dig in and try to keep using the same intervention, even though it wasn't landing, and that didn't work very well. So I learned just to reflect what was happening, just to help myself regroup. And so what I would do is I would say, I notice right here, right now, that as I say X, that you shift in your chair. I notice the tone of your voice changes. Something comes up right here, right now. Help me understand. And that would help me figure out, did I miss a tune to something that was going on? And therefore, my intervention wasn't appropriately applied because I misattuned, or was I in tune, but maybe there was a block that came up. So being able to reflect present process would help me regroup and figure out what was happening in present process to be able to decide what intervention do I need to use appropriately from this moment forward to help with the process. I hope that you found this helpful.
So I want to talk about myself of the therapist piece with this module where we're talking about attunement with our clients and skilled interventions. Well, mine wasn't so much one where I really had to pivot, even though that was a part of it. Also, my self of the therapist piece was a moment where I was doing an intervention and I did an intervention and it actually landed and the emotion came up and then it caught me off guard. I was working with this couple and I had been told that this couple really didn't do emotion, they didn't do enactment. And then there were several places along with this couple I had got blocked several times in trying to access their emotion. And then also there was a part where I got out of attunement with the client. I was kind of in my head and I kind of lost the emotional place of where they were. And so I had to apologize and make a pivot. I said, hey, I'm sorry. I think I'm a little bit lost here. So I want to go back. And then I went back to a place where I had heard her several times share. And I reflected this where she's like, it doesn't help where I'm in my head. And so I said, can you take me there to when you're in your head? And then when we got there, I did a reflection of her dilemma in what's going on is that she has this great fear and she wants to use these mechanisms to protect her fear. But then when she does those, she's afraid that's going to push her partner away. And I reflected that like 2 or 3 times. And then all of a sudden, a tear emerges. She gets red in her face and she slows down, and it caught me off guard. I did so much work to get to that place. And then I wanted to hurry up and capture it and work with it. Instead of really, it's like I had access to her emotion. I should have allowed maybe more of it to emerge. But if I'm honest in myself, it was so hard. I'm so disoriented from all the hard work just to get to that place. It was hard for me to slow down once my intervention had actually landed and did what it wanted to do versus the previous about 35 to 40 minutes of therapy where I had been getting blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked. So sometimes we got to be ready that you never know right when that intervention is going to land and it's going to actually access their emotion. And you've got to be ready for that part too. So thank you so much for listening to myself of the therapist piece.
Hey everyone, Stephanie here with Success and Vulnerability. Just coming to talk to you a little bit about when interventions don't land for me. It feels terrible. I hate it. You know, you put something out there, you kind of expect it to land, even if it's a simple reflection. Lately, I've been offering verbatim reflection to one of the clients that I'm working with, and the client will look up, which is a cue telling me, oh, they're thinking about that. They come back and tell me that actually doesn't fit for me. And it hits my body like that should have worked. I was kind of expecting a verbatim reflection to work. And when it doesn't, it throws me into a panic. My whole body kind of feels that panic. I immediately start thinking, oh my goodness, they're questioning my credibility. Or, if I can't just get that simple reflection right, then they're questioning my credibility. And then I begin to question me. Where are we going to go from here? How are we going to begin to get some traction? So then I brilliantly come up with, hey, let's just kind of talk a little bit more and talk ourselves out of the moment. So that's my go-to move when interventions don't land, is I'll stack a conjecture on a conjecture. I might offer a ride, like try to get them to come along with me to get us out of the moment. But when I do that, in those big mistakes, what I really miss and what shuts down first for me is my curiosity. Because what I've learned is there's those moments when that client, in a way, rejects that reflection. There's an absolute reason for that between them. And I have found out that there is a reason why, for this particular client, whenever I reflect that, why I can't say that's completely true. And it's almost too much to hear it back because it means something for their partner and it means something for them. But I miss that when I talk too much. I miss that when I think that, I missed here and I need to double down on something that's actually not working, which is talking too much or offering conjecture after conjecture or summary statements or try to get back on with validations. I actually missed the thing that's right in front of me. I don't have the curiosity in that moment. I don't have the capacity for that, to be able to really ask, what's going on within you right now and between you, and how does this make sense that you're, in a sense, rejecting this reflection. So help me get that. And I miss that moment, and I miss a lot when I try to get myself out of what feels like very awkward, very tense moment of missing an intervention. And mainly because I lack curiosity then because of the panic, and because of then I try to talk myself out of it. So anyway, maybe some of you all are like me, that tend to try to use a lot of words when you maybe don't feel comfortable, but yet we miss a lot in the moment when we do that. And so anyway, happy to be a part of the process with you all, happy to be learning and growing right alongside of you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Hey, Chad Emhoff here with the Success and Vulnerability team. Wanted to share a little bit about my process of learning EFT. So early on, especially, I was very focused on what we're talking about in this module, interventions. So I was like, what do I need to do? When do I validate? When do I reflect? When do I build out a cycle. How do I deepen emotion? Give me a list, give me structure, and it helped. It really did. The structure and the lists and all the interventions and kind of learning how to do those things really did help me know moves. But about the time I got to Core Skills 4, I had a supervisor in a role play say, "You're making the right moves, but can you feel what's going on in the room?" And I was like, I cannot feel what's going on in the room. I'm trying to make this list of moves, right? I was very much in my head. And so they kind of encouraged me to slow down and feel with the client. And so I went from this kind of digital, I'm doing these things, making this list of moves, or I know exactly how to the next play to make, to a very analog or very much more like attuned place. Started to feel with the client versus being a therapist doing therapy to a client. And I think that really helped my therapy. It's still something I have to consider. It's still something I think about. I can go to my head and teach or be cognitive or just do the next move. And sometimes that's needed. Sometimes you've got to have that list of moves, right? You've got to have that like, okay, how do I pivot? But I think when we're feeling with the client, when we're staying engaged and we're staying like, I want to call it analog or staying in tune with the client, it allows us to really flow. It allows it to work like music in some ways, where it's like we're just going with them and we kind of have our stack of interventions that we know back here, but we're showing up with the client in the present moment. All this takes a lot, and heck, we're all still learning. We're all trying to get better at this. But I do want to say, as you start to get the interventions down, as you start to get the structure and the flow down, I want to encourage you to remind yourself to be present. Be present with the client. It makes a big difference if we can let ourselves just show up and be with them, and we can kind of, as it was said about music, right? We learn the chords and we learn how to play so that we can forget it and just be in the music, so to speak. I want to encourage you, be in the music. And I'll tell you this too, it's not always easy to stay there. I still have days where I find myself kind of doing therapy to people, or I find myself kind of just working interventions and not really present, not really with the client. So we all struggle at this at some level, and maybe some folks are better at it than others, but I want to encourage you, hey, as you're learning these interventions, as you're thinking about stacking interventions and pivoting and all these things, let's not forget, as I tend to do, that I have to stay with the client. Anyway, thanks for letting me share this with you guys. Hope you're enjoying this module.
So this module has brought a lot of my self-awareness in sessions right to the surface. So I had quite a few options to choose from as I wanted to kind of bring to you myself as a therapist piece. It was really around the difference between me using interventions that I'm comfortable with and that I have wording around versus me trying to be like George or like Ryan or like some of the other trainers that have really been good examples for me to learn from. So as we've learned this module, the SV team has had rich discussion around all of the interventions, the application of the interventions, the motivation of the interventions, and there was a few from the extras list that I looked at and I thought, man, now is my chance. I see George doing this. This isn't one that I've done before or tried before. I'm going to try it. And so I was in a session with a couple that I've worked with for a while, and I was trying on George's example of tracking both sides of that protective action. And I was working with a withdrawer who really just gets paralyzed and shuts down. And I really tried my most smooth Georgeness to say, if you couldn't shut down in that space where you shut down and you didn't have shutting down as an option, what would that be like? And it was fumbly and awkward. And my withdrawer just kind of looked at me and said, I'm really confused about what you're asking me. And then I said, I'm really confused about what I'm asking you too. And so it was this moment where I realized, who am I trying to be right now? And I had to really quickly go, I'm really sorry. Let's just forget about that. And let's go back to just a second ago where I noticed something was coming up for you when you said, and I reset a trigger that she had, and we moved right along. And I remember after the session thinking, man, I need to get better at that intervention and practice it and try it on with colleagues and in supervision before I really feel comfortable landing it, because I was so mechanical in trying it, trying to figure out what would George do, that I missed that I'm the most important part of landing an intervention. Because if I'm not comfortable with it, my clients can feel my emotion just like I can feel theirs. And in that moment, I had to kind of regroup quickly, dismiss what I was trying to do because I knew that it wasn't going to land right for me in that moment. I was already flustered, and go back to something that really felt more stable for me. So I did. I had to apologize, throw it out, and we moved on with the session. And it was such an acute awareness for me that I can't just try on these interventions if I haven't really worked with them, practiced them, role played them, really gotten comfortable with what I am doing with them, which is why I love the last exercise that we just did, where we're really practicing all of the wording around the interventions. And so I wanted to bring that to you just to say, we as a team have been talking about how we try these on and how we fumble it or get ahead of or behind of. And that was a very real experience for me that flustered me right in session. So I hope that helps you kind of feel a little bit normal if that's what's happening for you, and really encourage you to do what's been beneficial for me and some of the other team members, which is practice, talk about it, and get my wording around what interventions I'm going to use in session. Thanks.